Hello, welcome to RPS Today, our show about events in the Reading Public Schools. Today we're going to talk about September being National Recovery Month, and we're specifically going to speak about efforts we're making across the district and the community on prevention. Dr. Doherty, our superintendent, and Erica McNamara, would you like to introduce yourself and let folks know your title and with RCASA, and then Julianne DeAngelis?
Sure. So Erica McNamara, Director of the Reading Coalition Against Substance Abuse, aka RCASA, and I've been with RCASA for 9 years, and we're located over at the Police Department.
And I'm Julianne DeAngelis, the Outreach Coordinator. I'm also a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. I've been with the Reading Coalition Against Substance Abuse for about 6.5 years.
So this is interesting. I'm embarrassed to say, because I am on the board of RCASA, so I should know this, but I didn't realize the coalition has been in existence for 9 years now.
Yes, it actually was developed in 2005. A committee was put together by the Board of Selectmen to basically study the issue of substance abuse in our community. Family members were coming forward concerned about overdoses in the community, concerned about the impact that they were seeing young people experience, not just themselves, but also maybe in their family. And so there was a year-long study process, and that committee actually recommended that we develop a formal organization, the Reading Coalition Against Substance Abuse. And so the organization was actually formally created in 2006. And from there, we developed a board of directors, eventually able to secure funding, and then hired staff, and Julianne and I are some of those staff.
How is the coalition funded?
So currently we are funded through the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy through a program called Drug-Free Communities. The way that this source of funding works is the focus is on local problems require local solutions. So the funding supports what our community coalition has decided is most important. And so what we've done is develop a community needs assessment that looks at all of our priorities, and then developed a strategic plan based on that to focus on reducing substance abuse amongst young people, and then also to build community collaboration around this particular issue of substance abuse. And so much of that collaboration it goes hand in hand with our work with the school district.
Now, you guys are housed at the police station, which I think for some people initially feels like a mismatch almost, because people think about the police as being into catching, not into prevention. So why did you decide to put yourselves in the police station, and what are the benefits of your being there?
So it was a purposeful decision. We work very closely with our school partners, also our town government partners. But the reason for being placed in the police station was our first responders are on the front line of dealing with substance abuse. They deal with it every day. They see people struggling at their most vulnerable period, and that information is very helpful to informing the prevention work that we do. And so really it is about the partnership that we've been able to develop. We need to know what the crisis level issues are in order to backtrack and figure out how do we prevent those issues. So we've developed a really strong collaboration within the department. We work directly under the chief of police, but we also have a partnership with our detectives division. So we inform prevention around getting resources out through our detectives. Also, we've been able to train all of our police officers. All of our officers now have at least 8 hours of substance abuse prevention training. We also train all of our officers in mental health first aid. So having that partnership with us being there, we've been able to build trust, and it has generated more officers referring folks to Julianne to get resources for their families. And so it's nice for the officer to be able to say, you know, they're right within our department. Julianne's a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. She'd be happy to talk with you. Here's her number. It just helps in terms of having on that front line the ability to share information, but it also, the work that the police does informs a lot of our prevention development work, as well as our work with the schools.
The police have a student resource officer in the schools also, so I really love that. Of course our police have to follow the law, but they really would prefer to prevent and to intervene productively than to punish. And I think that's a really, not every community has that approach, and I think it's really important.
And that step of having our CASA at the police department was a way for the chief and our officers to also show the community how committed they are to prevention. Although enforcement is an important part of what they do not see substance abuse as something that they want to be arresting on. What they want to do is prevent people from getting in those vulnerable situations, and also to reduce the harm to the community that's caused by folks who get very desperate because of their disease of addiction. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is intervene earlier through a number of programs that we'll talk about in a few minutes.
That's great. So Dr. Doherty, why do we need RCASA to work with our schools? I don't think a lot of people feel that there's necessarily a big problem with addiction in Reading or with the schools. So why do you feel it's important?
So like any community, we have students and we have children that are just, they have different issues that they come to school with each and every day. And obviously we want to create the most optimal learning environment for those students. And in order to do that, we want to make sure that we have supports and structures in place to help support all students if they're going through a difficult time. There was a study done many years ago called the ACEs study. It was done by the Center for Disease Control. Adverse Childhood Experiences is what ACEs stands for. And what they found out in that study is that the more of these adverse childhood experiences you have in your early years, the more difficult it is to do well in school, to have a job, that you may get more involved in substance abuse or risky behaviors, or actually your lifespan may be shorter. So our role would be to be able to put the prevention piece in, as Erica mentioned, and Erica and I and Erica and her staff work very closely with the teachers and to put in that prevention piece. But also, if there are students that are struggling and they have these different traumatic experiences, we have to have those supports and those structures in place to help support them in the schools. Because if that isn't done right, they're not going to learn.
Coming from a family with addiction in it, I can say that did affect my academic performance in some ways. I still did very well academically, but when I think back on my stress level in school, my retention, it certainly had an impact on it. So I think it's easy to forget that if there's addiction in a family, it can really affect school and academic achievement and performance. But also, I just found school a wonderful place to go to escape from a lot of what was happening in my home when things weren't going well. So I'm really thrilled that you're creating a safe space for people to come forward and get help and get support. I think it's critical. So what is happening then at the elementary level, the middle level, and the high school level? We're going to go through the levels because I think that you have taken a holistic approach to try to get kids thinking about and understanding the risks of addiction right from kindergarten on up, so that you can help maybe prevent some of these tragedies from happening. You want to talk about elementary school first?
And over the last 5 years, we've been able to incorporate changes at the high school level. We've recommended changes for the middle school level that will actually be implemented in the next year. And then at the elementary level, they've been piloting lessons. And the focus of the lessons is based on what we call the triangle, that all of the material that young people are looking at are covering three main areas: the social, the physical, and the mental, so that we can kind of create a more holistic approach, as you mentioned, because we know that when young people struggle or they have difficulty coping, it could be coming from what's going on in their brain and their body. It could be coming from a social interaction. And so what we want to do is have young people have more resiliency in terms of reacting to the difficulties they may experience, whether it's at home or at school or with peers. And some of the lessons that happen at the elementary level focus on behavioral health, even at a very young age, thinking about how do you manage stress, even as a young person? How do you navigate this issue of substances maybe being offered to you or noticing them? Or what if substances are used or abused in your family? How do you deal with that? How do you keep yourself safe? Who do you go to? Who's the trusted adult that you feel like you can share that with? Because as I'm sure you know, as someone who grew up in that environment, it's very difficult to talk about. A lot of times people feel embarrassed or ashamed of what's happening, even though it's not their fault, but they can feel worried about how the other adults might perceive them. And what we wanted to do was create opportunities within the curriculum for young people to feel like they could share in a group if they wanted to, but we know that for many young people, the group would not be the right environment. So to be able to build in other ways for them to connect with their teachers and their school psychologists. And so in addition to adding lessons at the elementary level and the middle school level, And at the high school level, we've trained all of our school psychologists and all of our teachers in a program called Mental Health First Aid. And so that is designed to support whatever's coming up in the curriculum. If young people raise an issue like, I'm worried about mom, or I'm worried about my older sister, everyone is now trained in a 5-step action plan to listen to young people non-judgmentally, so that stigma does not become a barrier. And they're also trained to offer supportive resources, and also in a way that is within context, meaning that we don't overreact, because you also don't want to scare a young person away if they disclose something. So it's been a learning process, both at the, looking at what materials are we going to use with students, to also how will the adults react if students bring up the material, which I think both sides are equally important. And we've learned that the adult professional development is as important as what students are getting. So that answered some of that question.
And I think there's also, in addition to the health curriculum piece, there's the social emotional learning curriculum piece. So at the elementary, we have the open circle, which is done at all of our elementary classrooms. We have mindfulness activities that our students are doing at different classes, and in our preschool, in terms of helping cope with stress and anxiety. At the middle school next year, we're going to be introducing in the advisory classes something called Facing History and Ourselves, which is an anti-bullying curriculum, which really takes a look at different lessons in history and how people reacted to it and treated people, and the lessons we can learn from that. We also have that as an actual class at the high school. And then at our high school, we use the Flex Block, where the guidance department is working with each grade on specific topics that are not only guidance-related activities, but social emotional learning activities. And so there's a real integration and a real effort to integrate the health piece, the social emotional piece, and the academic piece. We wanted to always take it as an integrated approach.
What else is happening then at the middle school level?
So some other things that are happening at the middle school level in terms of what lessons young people will be experiencing is there's a section on substance abuse, a section on behavioral health, a section on nutrition and activity, making healthy nutrition choices. There's an area focused on navigating stress, which you talked about, which comes up in a lot of areas, but I will say that the average student in the United States right now, even at the middle school level, manages a fair amount of stress. They're already thinking, believe it or not, at that age about their future, about college, and it's important for them to have ways to talk about it, to kind of grapple with it a little bit. And some of the ways that they do that within the curriculum is there's some really fun projects they're able to do, things that maybe could be shown on RCTV in the sense that they create PSAs and public service announcements. There'll be lessons in 6, 7, and 8, so they'll be progressively geared to their developmental age. So in 6th grade, you may be talking about nutrition, and there's a time between 6th and 7th grade where we see a slight increase in eating disordered behavior. So really important to get information out to our 6th graders to make them aware of areas to be careful about, because as they get older, there's pressure on body image, and making sure that young people have resources. And if they notice a friend, is fasting or overeating and purging, that's an unhealthy behavior, and there's ways to get support for that they're not alone in that.
We're seeing rise and increase nationally, aren't we, in anxiety and stress in kids? So do you want to say anything about that, or what we're seeing in terms of data on that here in Reading?
It's certainly concerning, and I know Erica can talk about it as well. The Youth Risk Behavior Survey data is one of the main pieces of data we look at in this area, and it's done every 2 years, and we've just received our 2017 results, which we're in the process of presenting. But you look at is, students, the things that stress out students the most, and there are questions in the YRBS, the types of things that are the major stressors in their lives. And so you take a look at that and you measure it to, compared to what other communities have, and both at the state and national as well. School definitely is a stressor in terms of the work and the expectations, and we are in a community that has high expectations for students. But peer relations is also a stressor, and things like that. So you look at that data and you find out ways, again, those coping skills that we talked about and how you address those. But then there's other questions that talk about, have you tried to self-injure? Have you tried to create a plan for committing suicide or attempting suicide. And those are certainly things that we need to look at as well. And how do we address those?
So the areas that we look at is not just do young people report having anxiety, but why? And what are the contexts in which they're getting most anxious? Are there certain parts of the school transition or certain developmental spots? We're seeing anxiety at the elementary, middle, and high school, and partly why we created our behavioral health task force 6 years ago now,
6 years ago.
Was to the increase that we're seeing at the elementary level. So that told us something, because at the high school level, there's a lot of context that you can put around some of the anxiety. There's increased pressure for getting ready for college. There's more social challenges. But at the elementary level, you don't have those same stressors. But you do have more requirements for kindergartners now. You do have more requirements for first graders now. So even at the elementary level, things have gotten a little bit more complex for kids. And we're seeing that kids are struggling with anxiety in terms of worry about their performance in school, and also separation from family. And so partly why we developed a focus on anxiety came not just from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey results, but also from the key informant interviews and our community needs assessment, where school educators and parents and even young little students were telling us that they were having worried bellies and they were anxious. And so the idea was to look at what's happening across the lifespan and see how we can support. And in terms of increase in anxiety overall in the United States, that's been trending up over the last 10 years. And there are some studies that have shown that it's the increased complexity in our society, the increased amount of expectations and stressors. Other folks say maybe we're just better at spotting it and able to recognize it. Either way, we want to make sure that young people are not uncomfortable every day they're in school. We want to make sure that there are ways for them to reduce that level of stress, to know what to do if they start to feel panicky. We've trained our school nurses on being more supportive and understanding and aware of what some of those symptoms look like, so that they can help calm a student down and de-escalate, so that they can return back to class feeling more comfortable. And young people are also learning their own strategies in therapy and counseling. Parents are great supporters of that, but it takes the whole community. There are pieces that we recognize that students may demonstrate behaviors in the school, but it's also something that a student takes home with them. So we want to make sure that whatever we're talking about in school, we're also offering resources for parents, which is why we developed our Youth Mental Health First Aid Project, which we can talk more about.
Excellent. And then how about the high school?
So the high school, we have a curriculum that's been implemented over the last 5 years. It's electronic and book-based. There's opportunities to learn a variety of different health education issues, ranging from substance abuse to human sexuality to nutrition. There are specific areas around behavioral health and mental health. They do cover suicide prevention. And so there's a lot of opportunities to do hands-on learning, small group work, peer work, as well as project-based learning.
Okay. And now you have a chemical health policy at the high school. Would you like to talk about what that policy is and what happens if a student violates it?
Sure. So this is actually an extension of the policy that the MIAA has in place, the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association, which governs all of the high school sports in the Commonwealth. And the MIAA policy has more of a focus on the consequences involved if there is a student that is violated the substance abuse policy, in terms of if they've been caught drinking or smoking or using other substances. We decided to take it a little bit further and add an education piece to it, so that we could support those students if they have violated the policy. And certainly there is a consequence, but we wanted to make sure that hopefully they didn't make a second mistake or a second error. We were trying to figure out, why did they do it? So the school committee worked really hard and created a policy in 2011 which had both pieces to it. And through the help of Erica and Julianne, if a student does violate the policy, the first offense, they have to attend an education class after school as part of that piece, and they're not allowed to go back and return to athletics until or the extracurricular piece, which is a new piece that we've added. So it's just not for athletics; it's extracurricular. until they finish that education piece. So I know that's something that you could talk a little bit more about that.
And Julie, do you do that
I
class?
I do. Myself and one of the health education teachers. We do it once a month, depending on how many students there are. Sometimes we have an influx of many students and we have to do it a couple times a month. Other times we don't have to do it at all. But it's a 2-hour class after school. It is not about preaching to the students about what they've done or what's wrong with it or what's right with it. It's more about taking accountability for what has happened, being able to identify the choices that are made and what can be done differently so that the offense doesn't happen again. There is, of course, an education component in it about the different substances that seem to be the most popular with the students. We also have parents involved in this because after the class is completed, the student would get a certificate of completion, and then I follow up with a call to the parent that the student has completed the class, and also a package is mailed out with some pamphlets and other kinds of information that includes resources if necessary, and also offer them any assistance that they might need over and above the class that was taken. So the students are take part in it as far as taking responsibility for their part in it, and then we follow up to make sure if there are any issues that came up in the class that need more private discussion, that also takes place, or any further intervention that might happen also.
Great. Now there's a new component also in high school, isn't there, that I'm hearing about, SBIRT?
Yes.
Which stands for?
Screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment. So it's basically a medical practice that was developed in emergency rooms to screen folks for substance abuse that could be risky or concerning. And it has now transitioned into primary care practices, into hospitals, healthcare settings, and then the last 2 years into the school setting. There was a state law that was passed, the mass opioid law, in March of 2016, that is now requiring that all schools implement the screening process called SBIRT in their schools in at least 2 grades starting next fall. Last fall, we piloted our first SBIRT. We wanted to get a little bit ahead of the deadline, so to speak, and Julianne was part of that process. Our school nurse oversees the process. She brings in students who are required to have some other health screenings like height, weight, scoliosis checks, and as part of that process, they also have a short meeting with her using the SBIRT process. They use a screening tool called the CRAFT, which is a evidence-based tool. It's just 4 short questions that ask if they have any involvement in substances or they're concerned about a friend or family member. If there's any worry during that screening process that a student might need more assistance, they're referred to Julianne. And then Julianne makes sure that they get any community supports and parents have the support they need. And then if there isn't any concern, the student just receives positive reinforcement. They're given information in case something does come up, and they're on their way. So last year we screened freshmen, and we had 300 freshmen, and a small percentage, about 3%, required some additional support and referral to services. Next year we'll be screening freshmen and juniors. So we're excited about the process. It's been a great learning opportunity to get to know students more one-on-one, and also to welcome them into the health office and let them know that that's a resource, because sometimes folks only come to the nurse when they're sick, and we want them to know that if they have a worry or concern that maybe it might not be a stomach ache, but it might be something that is going on in their brain or body, that they can come and see the nurse and get support. So it's a more proactive process versus the reactive process of our chemical health policy, where someone has to get in trouble to access some of those supports. We want to make sure that students know that they don't need to, they can just come and ask for support, and that the support is there.
Students, actually, isn't it? If it's 3%, that's about 10 students?
It's a little less than that, but
this year?
This year it was less than that.
But that seems like a really significant number of people to identify in one interaction, one tool, and to get assistance. And at the freshman year before that, anxiety builds even further.
Right. And there was a lot of great conversations that our nurse was able to have with students about worries that they had about friends or family members. And I think that's something that sometimes we forget, that it may not be happening directly to you. You may not be the one that's suffering, but you may be worried about an auntie or an uncle or a mom or a dad or a friend. And one of the best things that young people do is speak up for their friends, and they're often the ones that come forward and will ask teachers or our guidance counselors or social workers, I'm worried about my friend, what can I do? And that's a great way to be able to have that conversation privately.
Great. Now, what other events are going to happen in September then around Recovery Month?
So Recovery Month this September, it's a part of a national a movement called National Recovery Month. It's to strengthen families and communities. We'll be doing some specific events here in Reading, and there'll also be a number of statewide events through the Mass Organization for Addiction and Recovery. And 3 major events that we're focusing on is we're hosting a business event with our local Chamber of Commerce to educate businesses on how to have supports in their workplace for either employees or customers. We're also going to be having a special candlelight vigil to honor those that we've lost and also to celebrate those that are living in recovery. It requires a lot of daily support and effort to be in recovery, and we want to really celebrate that. And then we also are working on hosting our 11th annual meeting, which will be on September 29th at the high school, and that's going to be featuring Dr. Ruth Doherty. She's a fabulous family physician, held in high regard, has been speaking all over the state and in different parts of the country, and she speaks to some specific issues on dealing with the adolescent brain, the brain being under construction, how you can intervene a little bit earlier to prevent and reduce substance abuse.
Do you have anything you'd really like to leave the audience with as we wrap up?
I think the key to what has been successful in our school district and our community has been the partnership that we've had with the Reading Coalition Against Substance Abuse. As I said earlier, Erica could be a part of our staff for the amount of work and time and effort that she has working on the different aspects, whether it be the health curriculum or the SBIRT process. And I really think it's that partnership that has been so successful.
Great.
So I would say, building off that partnership, one of the projects we're most proud of is something we've created in the last 2 years, our Youth Mental Health First Aid Project. We were able to secure a separate federal grant that came about as a result of Sandy Hook. And the project was to train as many adults in a project called Youth Mental Health First Aid, to train adults to identify signs and symptoms of any concerning worries around mental health or substance abuse. And in 2 years, we were able to train 651 people in Reading. That's 8 hours of training, many classes. It includes all of our educators, elementary all the way to high school, as well as our secretaries and nurses and staff support. And that process has been able to create more eyes and ears in the school system, as well as across the community, noticing the concerns that we have around young people having trouble coping. Added to that, we've been able to secure a partnership with William James College using a service that they run called Interface. And we pay for this service for the town of Reading. It's open to anyone from infants all the way to the elderly and seniors. And folks can call one number, say that they're looking for a mental health counselor, and the Interface clinician will help them identify who is available, who has open appointments, and who accepts their insurance. And that matching process is something that we find and hear from families, that it makes it easier than calling around to 7 different places and not knowing what you're getting. So we tried to streamline that process. So between Youth Mental Health First Aid and Interface, we're trying to make it easier for folks in the community to access mental health services. So we want to know we want folks to know that we're listening and we're trying to respond with services. And if you have any questions, we have lots of great information on our website.
Right, you're a community-wide resource.
Community-wide,
You want people to get in touch with you.
Absolutely.
And use you. Julianne, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
We're trying to incorporate all of the sectors of the community in Recovery Month. It includes faith-based, as well as the school department, law enforcement, all of the social clubs that are in the community, trying to get them involved in all of this and to participate in as many of our events as possible.
Thank you. Well, we've just scratched the surface here. There's so much we can talk about how the coalition brings together segments of the community to look at prevention and productive intervention. And I hope that you'll watch for Recovery Month events, but also RCASA's other events throughout the year, including their film festival, usually in October, and other events as well. And we'll provide information about how you can contact them if you would like assistance, or if you want to volunteer, or if you want more information. Thanks so much. Thank you.